I'm Anne Geraghty-Rathert. I also am a sometimes lawyer and a faculty member. So I am here to sort of take the next piece from the First Amendment and the Supreme Court to what has happened as a result of the sort of the fracturing and the very amorphous kind of hazy lines around what is suitable, what's not, and how we define that within any particular context. So I'm going to be talking about both state and local school boards. So in order to start talking about this, first of all, we have to take a minute and sort of back up and look at who is calling for book bans. As Professor Higgins noted, there's been a huge upswing, a surge in the number of books that are being requested to be banned and that are being successfully banned, removed from shelves, particularly in school libraries, but even in some public libraries around the United States. So historically, it's sort of interesting that, obviously book bans have existed for a long time, but most of the time they started sort of in localized communities, localized school districts, with some concerned individuals coming to the school board and perhaps books were removed or they weren't removed, but usually it didn't go very much farther than the local community. What makes this situation much different is, of course, the proliferation of all things media and the internet and all those kinds of things. So just as we've seen the rise of other sort of hate groups, in addition to that, we've also seen the rise of groups that have a particular political ideology and are making moves based on that, right? So instead of just a single school district or a certain group of parents, we have large groups forming around the country of people who have a particular political ideology and who are working toward making that happen. So an organization called PEN America, which if you've never heard of it, you should be aware of it. They track all kinds of things related to for free speech, free expression, human rights, and literature, and all sorts of other things. And they keep very close track of every attempt to ban books or ban materials, digital or otherwise, anywhere in the United States. And so PEN America says there are currently about 50 groups that are working specifically toward banning certain books on certain topics. And interesting, 35 of those 50 groups have formed just since 2021. So 70% of the groups that are out there that are looking specifically to ban books have formed it within the last couple of years. So as a result, in the school year 2021-2022, 1,648 separate book titles. So, it could be in 100 districts, so 100 books, but separate book titles banned in locations throughout the United States. And so that is concerning and a huge, as I say, surge. A couple examples of some of the groups that exist, I'll give you just one in the interest of time. There's a group called Moms for Liberty. And Moms for Liberty, their mission is to fight against children having access to pornography. That's what their mission statement is. They currently now have 200 chapters around the United States, but they are working sort of subvertly as a cover against LGBTQ plus literature and access to materials in schools. So they're very concerning. They have a particular agenda, and a lot of people are following them. So that's, sort of just one example. There are many others. But what is the subject matter? As Professor Higgins said, a lot of this is targeted at specific identities. And so we look at, the academic year, I stated that number of the separate titles. This number is the instances of attempts to ban books in the United States, successful attempts, I should say. So that 1,600 titles banned, but 2,500 successful removals. And the books most frequently banned are coming of age sexual identity stories, both fictional and autobiographical, and race and racism narratives in American history, both fiction and nonfiction. So you can see that this is targeting specific people, specific stories, specific materials. And it's not a coincidence, right? It's not just that these groups are randomly finding books. Their agenda and their mission is to ban books from public school libraries. So going to content statistics, sort of as a backup evidence, that's what we lawyers do. We don't just make a statement. I'm going to tell you the percentages that PEN America has tracked. So of the books that have been banned. So first of all, the book bans have occurred in 138 K through 12 school districts in 32 different states. A total of 5,049 schools had books banned, taken off the shelves, serving over 4 million children. So we're talking about a lot of people here, right? In terms of the content, 40% of the banned books have primary or secondary characters who are people of color. 41% have primary or secondary characters who are LGBTQ+. 4% have primary or secondary characters who are members of religious minorities. 21% of the banned books directly address race and/or racism. 22% contain sexual content, including such things as sexual experiences, teen pregnancy, sexual assault, rape, abortion, puberty, sex acts, and relationships. This is obviously shocking and horrifying, but it's even more horrifying when you take into consideration the number of books that are written by and or are about the groups and the people who are being targeted, and the number that are published, and the number that are even in public school libraries. So there are a limited number of children's and young adult books that are, again, written by or about people who fit these identities in the first, few of these categories. And so we're talking about, first of all, a very small fraction of books that are even in libraries, and they're being targeted such that of the book bans, 40%, 41%, having that kind of content. So this is clearly beyond targeting. It's an agenda, right? So another, so this is playing out in a lot of different ways. As I think actually Carla mentioned in her introduction, there are states that currently have criminal statutes on the books that criminalize giving what they're calling pornography or obscenity materials to children. And these are the 6 states. You'll be happy to see that we're sitting in one of them. And there are the others. In addition, though, to these 6, there are 8 states, additional 8 states that are pursuing legislation that specifically negates the defense from prosecution exemption. So let me tell you a little bit about that. A lot of the statutes that have existed historically having to do with pornography and obscenity have exempted educators and librarians from the penalties. In other words, under the understanding that most educators, hopefully all educators and librarians, are supplying materials to people, for their knowledge in the interest of education, and not to give them materials that are really, obscene or pornographic. But 8 states are pursuing legislation right now that would take away those exemptions for librarians and teachers, such that any teacher or librarian, depending on how each state statute is written, would be, potentially under fire for even assigning things, even providing materials like free reading that isn't part of the instruction, and could be criminally charged. So as an example of that, we have Missouri, right? So Missouri, this is just one of them, and this is actually the statute that was just recently, just came into effect in August of 2022, but it also now has another part that they're proposing, as we'll see. So the Missouri criminal statute makes it a Class A misdemeanor, a punishment of up to a year in jail and or a fine of up to $2,000 for, as you can see, the name of the act is the offense of providing explicit sexual material to a student. So that's the crime, that's the punishment, as a Class A misdemeanor. And this, as I said, went into effect in August of 2022. The good news is that no books have been banned in Missouri since that time. The bad news is that over 300 books have been taken from the shelves in school classrooms and libraries by educators and librarians because of their fear that they will be personally prosecuted for the materials being available to their students. So a preemptive move, right? Before they can get in trouble, before the bans go into effect, going through their own libraries, going through the school library and removing books from the shelves. And among the school districts that have done this are Wentzville School District, Kirkwood, Melville, Lindbergh, Rockwood, and Webster Groves across the street. All of whom have removed books preemptively.
Let me just say, on last week, we heard from the assistant superintendent for learning, I think, of the Webster Groves School District, and he described the process of what they had to go through in response to this law and what, you know, what they did and why. It was really interesting.
I would love to hear that. I'll have to discuss that with you later. They, you know, weren't very clear about the process, so I'm sure it's somewhere. So since August 2022, the books that have been removed from the shelves as tracked by PEN America are this whole list, including, you know, a lot of different kinds of materials. The Children's Bible, Mouse, the graphic novel about the Holocaust, graphic novel depictions of Shakespeare and Mark Twain, The Handmaid's Tale, 76 books on art history, and they cover over 600 artists across time and space. 6 historical books about the Holocaust, comics including Batman, X-Men, and The Walking Dead, autobiographical graphic novels by LGBTQ+ authors, a graphic novel about the Gettysburg Address, a graphic depiction of the novel The Giver, in which in the graphic novel, someone is bathing an elderly person, and the book Cats versus Robots #1, which featured a non-binary robot. And thus the basis for removing it from the shelf, because we can't have non-binary robots. Let's say no. Okay, so that's Missouri. As I said, there's a lot of proposed legislation out there in a lot of different, going in a lot of directions. What's most important is that you realize that this is proposed legislation. So not all of this is going to be passed, because when you look through it, and you know, I'll talk about it if I have time, we'll see, I might come back to it. But some of it is so horrifying and shocking that it could really truly frighten you personally. But it's important to note that some of this is legislation that won't pass, and that perhaps there is a role that you could take by informing legislators that this is not something you want to have happen. But let's just look at, I'll come back to this slide and talk about it if I have the time, but let's just look at some of the trends that these pieces, or these proposed pieces of legislation have in them. So first of all, many proposed laws and policies are designed to make book banning easier, right? To make it easier to have the process. They're putting into place, you know, policies that, you know, make it almost inherent in the curriculum. So they're, you know, that's one of the trends. Laws are chilling access to information. So as I said, you know, when people preemptively take books off of shelves, that's an example of chilling speech. That's what we say in the law, like freezing people where they are so that they don't act, they're afraid to act, right? So, you know, laws are chilling access to information. Censorship efforts are increasing at all public libraries, not only those that are attached to K-12 schools. And then sexual content is becoming equated in the legislation with existing definitions of pornography. So almost every state in the United States, I'm sure I said almost just because I'm not 100% clear, but I'm sure they all have a definition of what pornography and obscenity is within their state, because it's often subjected to, you know, local or state standards. So what they're doing is creating legislation now about book banning that makes a lot of just typical sexual content equivalent to pornography or obscenity, so that almost anything with any sexual content at all, including, you know, being written by an LGBTQ author, having content that they deem obscene because it's about LGBTQ relationships or relationships with sex or whatever, all of those are being subjected to new definitions of what constitutes pornography. And then book ban advocates are becoming much more expansive in their vision or agenda. So I actually want to look at some of this for just a second. some examples of number 5 here are, hold on, I wrote this down, so I have to look at it. There we go. So targeting book displays in libraries and even in bookstores sometimes in some states. So if you have like a Black History Month display, it could be targeted because it's a particular type of display, not even necessarily, they say, going to content. Targeting readings in classrooms by people who they designate are bringing obscenity to the classroom. So like drag performers who are reading, that is, part of some of the legislation. Requiring new age-related book rating systems. So making libraries come up with their own system of rating, the books on a scale of 1 to 5, primarily, and the ones that are proposed, and some of them not being accessible to students. And then obviously more intense oversight of curriculum, including digital curricula. A teacher was actually arrested for providing the website to the Brooklyn Library that is providing free access to banned books. And so she was arrested because she gave the link to the student. Banning certain publishers. So this is sort of a really interesting one, I think. And, going back to that slide that I skipped over, one of the states, Texas, is proposing legislation, see if you can follow this, that would make it illegal for any state money to go to a particular publisher if that publisher publishes the book genderqueer. So in other words, no state money of any kind can go not just to buying that book, but to the publisher who publishes the book. So of course, the idea being, publishers are in the business to make money. So if we attack the publisher by saying, if you publish this book, and then they said, or other, it also says, or other books deemed objectionable. This way we can target publishers because they're in the business of making money. They're not going to protect 1% of the books for the 99% of revenue that they would otherwise get. So that is a far-reaching and horrifying potential piece of legislation. Not that they all aren't, but that one is, you almost have to hand it to them for creativity on that one. So the books that have been banned the most in the United States in the calendar year 2022 are these. And they are in order, starting here and going across like that, right? So the book most banned in the United States in 2022, the book Genderqueer, a memoir. And then the second most, All Boys Aren't Blue, Out of Darkness, The Bluest Eye, The Hate You Give, Lawn Boy, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, 13 Reasons Why, The Kite Runner, Later Gator, and Crank. So those are in order by how the most banned to the least banned, but of course these are the top books that are banned in general, so all of them banned under significant circumstances. This is a quote from Toni Morrison, of course, the author of The Bluest Eye, and a prolific, important writer. And she says, the thought that leads me to contemplate with dread the erasure of other voices, of unwritten novels, poems whispered or swallowed for fear of being overheard by the wrong people, outlawed languages flourishing underground, essayist questions challenging authority never being posed, unstaged plays, canceled films. That thought is a nightmare, as though a whole universe is being described in invisible ink. And so that brings me to the end of the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go back because it's me. So I just wanted to look at, some of these, as I said, the Texas statute down there toward the bottom, these are in alphabetical order by state. State institutions could not purchase materials from vendors who sell books they deem inappropriate, i.e. genderqueer. But then we have all these other ones like Florida requiring teachers to attend Education Week to be trained on controversial material and how to deal with it. Indiana, prosecution for harmful material, now that's big, provided to minors. Also specifically outlaws drag reading performances and certain book displays. Iowa, children may mention same or other sex parents, but there can be no discussion of sexual identity or orientation in K through third grades, other than a child mentioning that they have parents that are LGBTQ. Mississippi can sue library workers for damages caused by books and events, not saying what those damages are, not saying how we define the damages, just damages. Missouri has proposed legislation that would pay teachers an extra $3,000 a year, this is public school teachers K through 12, to attend Patriot classes, to be trained about objectionable materials. Now I ask you, where was that $3,000 when they wanted to buy book supplies? Where was it? And now they come up with $3,000 to go to Patriot class. Okay. Montana, educators subject to penalties unless they give 48 hours notice of upcoming lessons on human sexuality instruction. Nebraska, school districts would have to develop ways for parents to inspect all curricular materials and ways for them to object to them. This also includes a gag order on teaching anything about race or racism. North Dakota, ban proposed on all books featuring gay or trans humans.
Did they say humans
They did
specifically?
say humans.
So we can have Tango Mix 3.
Well, that's an interesting question about the penguins. They shouldn't have said humans if they were trying to get rid of it. But Tango, that book is often banned, especially in elementary schools. Then I told you Texas, West Virginia, all books about LGBTQ plus people would be deemed obscene by the statute. Wyoming, the term child pornography would be expanded to include certain comics, cartoons, and graphic novels. So that is my presentation.